First, to understand the tension in the meeting, one has to grasp why Ukraine is pushing so hard for Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are long-range, precision missiles the US has used for years. Their defining feature is that from deep inside friendly territory, they can strike high-value military targets far behind enemy lines, not just border zones but potentially deep into Russian territory, for example, Moscow or St. Petersburg, depending on deployment. That capability offers Ukraine something it currently lacks: the leverage to threaten, or at least credibly degrade, Russia's rear area military infrastructure, supply lines, command systems, or logistics nodes. If Ukraine can credibly strike deep Russian targets, that may force or pressure Russia to negotiate more seriously on peace talks. Zelenskyy's argument is that such weapons are not for civil targets, but exclusively military ones, thereby raising the cost for Russia to continue the war. But the flip side is the potential escalation. By supplying Ukraine with weapons that can reach deep Russia, the US or its partners run a risk of aggravating the war, provoking stronger Russian retaliation, or being seen as a direct combatant rather than a supporting power. The meeting. Trump and Zelenskyy, October 17, 2025. On October 17, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House. It was their first face-to-face meeting since September 23. The agenda was partly about military aid, especially the Tomahawk missile request, and partly about coordinating diplomacy ahead of a planned US-Russia summit. At the start of the meeting, Trump made a striking remark. He said, "The United States needs Tomahawk cruise missiles, too," hinting that Ukraine's request is being weighed not just as a favor, but as something that also affects US military reserves and interests. Zelenskyy, in turn, responded cautiously, warning that the transfer could lead to a lot of bad things, meaning escalation, retaliation, or destabilization, even while reaffirming his view that Tomahawks are necessary to push Russian President Vladimir Putin into serious peace talks. Zelenskyy further stressed that the missiles would only be used against strictly military targets inside Russia, not civilian ones, and that Ukraine would also leverage drones, many of which it is developing domestically, in tandem. He expressed a vision of deeper cooperation in drone production and development as part of a barter or partnership. Ukraine gives the US drone know-how or production in exchange for missile support. Some reporting suggests Zelenskyy offered to trade Ukraine's drone capacity for Tomahawks. On the diplomatic side, Trump revealed that he had just held a call with Putin on October 16 and was preparing a summit with him in Budapest, Hungary. He said he did not intend for Zelenskyy to be part of a three-way meeting. Trump also shared that he had not yet committed to sending Tomahawks to Ukraine, citing concerns about US stockpiles and overextending US commitments. Thus, the meeting was a moment of both engagement and tension, Zelenskyy pressing his case, Trump hedging, and both eyeing the broader diplomatic environment. Points of tension, risks, incentives, and constraints. From that interaction emerge several tensions and constraints that help explain why the decision is so fraught. 1. U.S. domestic constraints and military stockpiles. Trump's remark, "We need Tomahawks too," is not empty rhetoric. The U.S. must maintain certain reserves of strategic weapons so that its own military readiness is not impaired. Deploying large numbers of advanced cruise missiles to Ukraine could strain those reserves or force prioritization in future conflicts. Trump is thus signaling caution. Even if Ukraine wants them, the U.S. must weigh its own security needs first. Moreover, the decision to supply powerful weapons is politically sensitive. It can become a matter of congressional oversight, public opinion, and alliances. The U.S. can't indiscriminately provide every weapon Ukraine asks for without incurring domestic backlash or diplomatic complications. 2. Escalation risk with Russia. One of Zelenskyy's fears, that giving Ukraine Tomahawks might lead to a lot of bad things, is real. Russia has repeatedly warned that transferring such weapons would provoke severe consequences, possibly pushing the war into a broader conflict or increasing the risk of direct confrontation between Russia and the U.S. From the Russian perspective, allowing Ukraine to strike deep within its territory shifts the dynamic. Ukraine is no longer just defending but can threaten Russian strategic depth. That could trigger more aggressive Russian countermeasures, strikes on Ukrainian logistics, more intense missile campaigns, cyberattacks, or risking escalation to involve third parties. Zelenskyy seems aware and cautious of that danger. 3. Credibility and signaling in diplomacy. For Zelenskyy, gaining Tomahawks is not just about the weapons themselves, it's about the signal it sends to Putin and the international community. If Ukraine shows it has deep strike capability, it may strengthen its position in negotiations, making Putin less confident in continuing aggression. It serves as deterrence. Zelenskyy sees the missiles as leverage rather than just arms. But from Trump's side, there is a balancing act, supporting Ukraine enough to maintain U.S. influence, but avoiding being drawn into an even larger war or making irreversible commitments. Trump may want to broker diplomacy with Putin and see military escalation as undermining those efforts. Also, there is signaling to NATO and U.S. allies, whether the U.S. is committed to Ukraine long-term, and to what degree it is willing to risk escalation. 4. The upcoming U.S.-Russia summit in Budapest. The scheduled summit in Hungary between Trump and Putin, as part of efforts to de-escalate or manage the conflict, adds another layer of complexity. If Trump appears to be mass-arming Ukraine with Tomahawks right before meeting Putin, it may spoil diplomatic goodwill or provoke stronger demands from Russia. Trump's decision may partly hinge on how he wants to approach the summit, as a pressure tactic, a negotiation tool, or a path to de-escalation. Trump's indication that he doesn't plan a three-way meeting, i.e. not having Zelenskyy and Putin together, suggests he wants to manage bilateral dynamics. What did each leader gain, or risk, from the meeting? Zelenskyy's gains and risks. Gains. He made his case in person to the most powerful U.S. decision-maker. Face-to-face diplomacy allows more direct persuasion, emotional appeal, and pressure. He framed Ukraine as a willing partner in technology, especially drones, and offered to deepen cooperation, making the request a two-way exchange rather than a one-sided plea. He reaffirmed that these weapons would be used responsibly for military targets, hoping to limit U.S. and global backlash. The meeting helps maintain momentum for U.S. support, keeps the request alive in public discourse, and signals to Putin and the world that Ukraine is not turning away from strong options. Risks. Zelenskyy might be disappointed if Trump refuses. That could weaken Ukraine's negotiating position or morale. The rhetoric could provoke Russia or increase Moscow's pressure, possibly causing retaliation against Ukraine's infrastructure or civilians. If the U.S. later denies or restricts the transfer, Zelenskyy may face domestic critique of overly bold demands. Trump's gains and risks. Gains. Trump shows he is actively engaging in diplomacy and conflict management, not just reactive, a point he might use to bolster his global and domestic image. By cautiously entertaining the idea and demanding reciprocity or assurances, he retains strategic flexibility. He can position himself as mediator, supplying arms but calling for peace, rather than simply fueling war. That helps him lead the narrative in the upcoming summit with Putin. He may use the meeting to extract concessions, signal U.S. limits, or recalibrate his posture toward Russia. Risks. If he appears to back away too much, he risks being seen as unreliable or weak in Ukraine's eyes, possibly hurting U.S. credibility. If the transfer goes forward and escalation ensues, the United States could be drawn deeper into the conflict or blamed for provoking Russia. Domestically, critics may argue he is either too reckless, arming Ukraine with powerful weapons, or too timid, not supporting Ukraine enough. Possible scenarios after the meeting. Here are some Cole-style scenarios that could unfold. 1. Trump approves a limited Tomahawk transfer. He might agree to send a modest number of missiles or place them under conditions, e.g. via NATO, limited use zones, strict oversight. That path tries to balance support and caution. The caveat is that such limited transfers may have limited strategic effect, enough to boost morale but not enough to fundamentally shift the balance. 2. Trump declines or delays. He might decide that supplying Tomahawks is too risky or depletes U.S. readiness. Instead, he may offer alternate support, air defenses, drones, intelligence, logistics. Zelenskyy then must press harder for alternatives or push back diplomatically. 3. A conditional bargain or trade, e.g., drone swap. Zelenskyy proposed, and some media reported, a barter. Ukraine gives its drone technology or production in partnership, in exchange for U.S. missile support. If Trump accepts that kind of package deal, it may make the arrangement more politically palatable, and bind Ukraine more closely to U.S. interests. 4. Escalation from Russia, leading to recalibration or rollout of diplomacy. If rockets start going deep into Russia, Moscow may respond aggressively, cyberattacks, hitting Ukrainian supply lines, or more indiscriminate strikes. That may force the U.S. and NATO to step in with additional aid or recalibrate the diplomatic approach. 5. The summit with Putin shifts the calculus. If Trump can negotiate a ceasefire or peace framework with Putin in Budapest, then the need for large-scale arms transfers may lessen. The summit outcome may determine whether Tomahawks become less necessary or more essential as leverage. Trump may time or condition the transfers in alignment with that diplomatic track. Why this meeting matters. This encounter is more than a weapons negotiation, it is a focal point of how the US-Ukraine relationship will evolve in this phase of the war, how the broader balance with Russia will shift, and how diplomacy and force will be interwoven. Leverage versus escalation. Ukraine wants leverage, the US fears escalation. This meeting crystallizes that tension. Diplomatic tempo. The impending US-Russia summit means that decisions now affect not just short-term war dynamics but also the framing of any potential negotiation or armistice. Credibility and alliances. The US position will be watched by NATO partners, by Russia, and by public opinion. Overcommitment or underperformance both carry risks. Role of emerging technologies. The interplay between missiles and drones, domestic and partnered weapons production, and capability exchange points to how future conflicts may be structured, not just transfers, but co-production, joint systems, reciprocal obligations.